recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear an interviewer asking an interviewee called Lee to do a questionnaire on residency in the North. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. You will see that there is an example which has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Excuse me?
Yes?
I was wondering if you could spare a few minutes to do a questionnaire on your residency here in the North. It won't take long.
No, that's fine.
Lovely. First of all, may I get some information about yourself?
Okay.
May I know your name and age?
My name's Lee, and I'm 19 years old now.
Lee says that he is 19 years old now, so 19 has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Excuse me?
Yes?
I was wondering if you could spare a few minutes to do a questionnaire on your residency here in the North. It won't take long.
No, that's fine.
Lovely. First of all, may I get some information about yourself?
Okay.
May I know your name and age?
My name's Lee, and I'm 19 years old now.
Great. And could I ask what your job is? Are you a student?
Actually, I'm going to continue my study in business management next month. But at the moment, I'm a salesman by profession.
Oh, right. And how long have you been living here in the North?
Well, I have been in this city since I was 3 years old, but my family and I had lived in the East for 7 years at first. Now I am 19, so I have spent about 9 years living here till now.
Great. Which part of the northern area do you live in?
I live in Spring Park. Have you heard of it?
Yes, of course. So, what about your accommodation? Do you live in a house or a flat or something similar?
I used to live with my family in a big house, and now I'm living in an apartment with 2 of my friends, who are my colleagues as well.
Oh, right. And one more question. What means of transport will you take when you need to go somewhere?
If it's not too far away, I'd prefer to go on foot or by bicycle. If there is a long way to go, I take the train or sometimes a cab. I rarely take buses because I think the most important things to keep in mind are time and comfort.
Great. Thanks.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Now, let's go to the second part of my questionnaire. I'd like you to tell me, how often do you dine out? Is it once a week or several times a year?
I'm afraid neither of those options agree with me. I don't often go out for dinner, maybe once a month, Every week just seems too often for me.
OK, then where do you usually go for recreation?
I often go to places that other people go to. I sometimes go clubbing after work. You know, there are some fantastic clubs nearby.
And if you do not have to work during the day, will you go for a show or something?
You know, there is a newly built theatre that opened last month in Spring Park, but I rarely go there because it's too expensive. I prefer to go to the cinema to see some of the latest movies.
Do you like doing sports? And what is your main form of exercise?
I like swimming and I go to the gym occasionally, but I spend most of my spare time sailing.
All right. Last question. Have you taken any part-time courses?
Yes, because I'm really keen on cartoons. I'm doing a Japanese course during the weekends, but I'm still a beginner.
Wow, what a special language. Most people I know would like to learn Spanish or Latin. You must be brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Bye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 2. You will hear a man talking about a parliament building. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Listen carefully to the first part of the talk and answer questions 11 to 17.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all see and hear me? Good. Now, my name's Dan, and I'm your guide this morning for our tour of the New Zealand Parliament. Now, we're standing in the executive wing of the Parliament complex. This is where all the government ministers have their offices and where the Prime Minister and the Cabinet meet. Now, most people here refer to this building as the Beehive, and no prizes for guessing why it's called the Beehive. That's right. It's shaped exactly like a traditional beehive, and it's one of the most famous buildings in Wellington. Now, I'll start with some background information about the design and construction of the building. It may come as a surprise for you to learn that the architect wasn't a New Zealander. No. In fact, it was designed by a Scottish architect, Sir Basil Spence. He designed the concept for the building during a visit he made to our city in 1964. His idea was that all the offices and rooms would radiate from a central core. Now, the Beehive was built in stages over 10 years. Construction began on building the underground car park and the basement at the end of the 1960s, in 1969. And over the next decade, the remaining floors were constructed. Yes, 1 decade later, in 1979, the first parliamentary offices moved in. Now, as you can see, the Beehive is pretty high. In fact, it's 72 metres tall. It has 10 floors above ground and an additional 4 floors below. So that's a total of 14 floors altogether. That means there's plenty of space for the many facilities available to the members of Parliament and ministers to use. These include a small theatre and a television studio. Now, if you'd all just like to follow me, we can make our way inside the building itself.
Now you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen to the rest of the talk and answer questions 18 to 20.
Here we are in the entrance foyer. It's a very airy space, isn't it? And if you look at the floor you're standing on, you'll see it's made of marble. And if you look to your left, you can see some beautiful columns. They are also made from marble. Now, look at the wall panels. They are made of stainless steel. They look really stunning, don't they? Now, straight ahead of us is the staircase leading to the first floor of the building. As you can see, the railings on the staircase are made of bronze. Now let's make our way up this beautiful staircase to the banquet hall on the first floor, and we can admire these beautiful bronze railings on the way. So this is the banquet hall, and as you can see, it's shaped in the form of a semicircle. It's also a pretty big space, isn't it? It's actually a big enough dining room to hold up to 300 guests. Now look at the large mural to your right. It's three-dimensional and shows the atmosphere and sky of New Zealand. And the floor we're standing on is made of wood. It's a native New Zealand timber called tawa. Okay, now let's make our way to the...
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
You will hear a conversation between a university lecturer and two students. You have 30 seconds to look at questions 21 to 30.
James, Carol, thank you for coming in. Have a seat. So, I take it both of you have completed your interviews with the managers?
Yeah.
Right. Great. Remind me, who was supposed to do the interview with the manager from the chain supermarket?
That was me.
Right, so that means that you were going to do the interview with the clothes shop, Carol, right?
Yeah, but we decided to swap at the last minute, so I did the supermarket instead.
OK, so let's start with you first, Carol. If I remember correctly, you reported that your interviewee was very difficult to get through to. Is that right?
Yeah, he had a very busy schedule, so it was hard for him to fit me in and show me around the store and everything. We had to reschedule about 3 times before I finally managed to do the interview with him.
And how was it for you, James?
Oh, I had no issues at all. I just went in on a weekday and the shop was empty, so we did it right there and then.
Great. So, Carol, how did you find the management scheme? Let's start with how they recruit their trainees.
So, according to the manager, The way it works is that the graduates go through a rigorous recruitment process that includes an interview with a panel and a trial day. Then they have to go through a probationary period of 3 months, and if their performance is satisfactory during those 3 months, they're offered a place in the scheme.
And yours, James?
Well, it's quite similar to Carol's, actually. The only differences are that they're on probation for 6 months and there are 3 individual interviews instead of a panel. Oh, and you don't need to be a graduate. Sometimes they recruit people internally for the scheme if their performance suggests they could be a good fit for it.
Okay, and how about the training offered? Carol?
It's all very on the job. Trainees start at the bottom as shelf stockers or delivery merchandisers. Then they slowly move up the ranks by becoming cashiers, shift supervisors, assistant managers, and finally managers. It's actually very similar to what any employee would have to go through if they wanted to become managers. The only difference is the timescale. The whole process would normally take more than 5 years, but in the scheme, they cram it down to 3.
Right. James?
Well, again, very similar to Carol's. The only thing is that there's also plenty of external training involved. People on the management scheme are sent abroad for 6 months, usually to Italy or France, to witness firsthand the production of a new season's collection. So they spend some time with the designers and they tour the factories where the clothes are produced. They also receive training on management skills through college courses paid for by the company.
And how long would it normally take someone on the scheme to become managers?
It depends on their performance, but normally about 2 years. There's also the part-time option, though, which would take about 4. Oh, no. Sorry, 5, because their probation period is a year instead of 6 months.
Great. So, what was your overall impression of the scheme from your interviews with the managers?
Well, the manager I spoke to was very friendly and incredibly knowledgeable. He had been through the scheme himself, and he attested to its efficiency and helpfulness. The only criticism I'd have is what James said. In their company, there's almost no external training involved, and I think it would be useful to send graduates to courses at further education colleges to improve their general knowledge and understanding of management skills. But overall, yes, very positive.
Great. And you, James?
The same as Carol. The manager I spoke to was incredibly friendly and eager to promote her scheme. She hadn't actually gone through it herself, but she was very involved in the process, both in training and in recruitment. She's actually one of the 3 people who do the interviews for the new trainees. And I really like the structure with the classes at college. I think that's very useful and it improves the trainees' chances of getting another job eventually, should they decide to leave the company in the future. The only thing I have to say against it is that 2 years is too short in my opinion. It should really be closer to 3 years, as I imagine the trainees would get exhausted fairly quickly with all this information fired at them in such a short span of time.
Thank you both. So now you know you need to compare your 2 interviews and decide which scheme would be most beneficial to someone from a disadvantaged background, especially those who...
Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You will hear a lecture on meteorology and cloud formation. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. It's good to see so many of you taking an interest in meteorology. As you are all newcomers to the topic, let's keep it simple to start with. In fact, let's begin with a very simple definition of what meteorology is. The suffix, ology, gives you a clue. At least you can all guess that it is the study of something. Meteorology is in fact the scientific study of all changes in the atmosphere, essential for forecasting the weather, of course. And you all know what weather is, right? The four main ingredients are the sun, the atmosphere, water vapor, and the wind. They all come together, disseminating heat from the sun around the globe and making clouds in the layer of the atmosphere directly above the ground, which is called the troposphere. Look up into the sky, and on almost any day of the year, you'll see clouds. Clouds form when water that has evaporated from the surface of the earth condenses onto microscopic dust particles, or other particles, floating in the air. Cloud formation takes different shapes, and they mostly get their names from Latin roots. Now, let's look at the five most basic. We'll start with cumulus, which is a low cloud with a white, puffy appearance, and most often composed of water droplets. It gets its name from cumulo, meaning heap, for its typical piled-up appearance. Now let's move on to stratus, from strato, meaning layer. These are the gray, horizontal ones, often with a flat base, that you see on an overcast day, and they too are mostly made up of water droplets. At this point, I should mention fog, which you probably don't even think of as clouds, but fog consists of very low-stratus, ground-hugging clouds. The high-altitude cirrus cloud, on the other hand, is mostly made of ice crystals and appears wispy and thin, almost hair-like in fact. That's where they get their name, from the word cirro, meaning wisp of hair. They are generally fair-weather clouds. Not so the cumulonimbus, the tallest of all clouds. They extend way up into the troposphere, and these are the ones that produce lightning, thunder, heavy rain, strong winds, and tornadoes. Beware the cumulonimbus. You already know what cumulo means, and it won't surprise you to find out that nimbus means rain, and added as a suffix is an indication of cloud's ability to produce precipitation, which could be rain, snow, or hailstones. As this course progresses, you'll learn a lot more about cloud types, but before I finish today, I want to go back to something I mentioned before, dust. It is generally accepted that when water vapor ascends in the process of cloud formation, it condenses onto dust particles. So it was assumed large dust particles would produce larger droplets and enhance the formation of rain. However, recent research has shown the opposite to be true. Droplet size increases the farther the clouds are from dust-filled air. More dust reaching rain clouds produces less rainfall. Scientists have shown that as more and more dust enters a rain cloud, the same amount of water becomes spread out. The resulting smaller water droplets scatter instead of combining and growing large enough to make up raindrops. This study shows that higher dust frequency is not inevitably the result of diminished rainfall, but rather its cause. Therefore, loss of topsoil from overgrazing, overcultivation, or bad livestock management in areas neighboring deserts will contribute to the continuing expansion of those arid regions. Your assignment for this week will be to read up on this research and write a report on how dust from damaged land may exacerbate drought conditions and lead to further desertification of arid areas. In other words, how land use has an impact on climate change.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.